light slips through soft skin, peach fuzz, the give of ripe flesh, and for a breath, the knife is only kitchen light and a tidy cunt. Then the flesh opens like memory. A face looks back, a woman's face, not painted, not a trick of the skin. For a second, there is a heartbeat in the fruit. A neighbor upstairs hears a sound, soft as a name, carried on the same warm air that brought the scent of sugar. She says it sounded like Mara. She goes outside, and the orchard goes as if someone had held their breath.
I'm Samnang. This is where we trade comfort for curiosity. Find somewhere dark and quiet. Put your headphones on. Listen like you're the one standing in the trees. Tonight's story is called The Orchard of Faces.
The sisters, Mara and June, were the kind of people towns tell easy stories about. Childhood and a single photograph, a mother who worked 2 shifts, a bicycle with a bent bell. They worked, they argued about nothing, and they kept small, stubborn traditions. June baked for holiday tables. Mara kept a small notebook of names. The orchard sat behind their house like an old neighbor. Rows of trees that had fed the town more years than anyone could count.
It used to be the orchard everyone drove past without thinking. Fruit stands in summer, dust on the road, kids stealing apples. Then the canker came, then the market closed, then the keeper, an old man named Harlan, died. The trees were left to murmur among themselves. People gave less and less attention to the boundary between field and rumor. Silence gathered there like dew.
The first public trimmer came from a boy who happened to be cutting an apple for lunch. He split it open and said later that the core had a face pressed into the grain, eyes closed, mouth as if mid-sigh, the angle of a cheek he had only ever seen in an old missing persons photograph taped up in the feed store.
Everyone told themselves easy things. Fruit bruises make patterns. Someone carved a prank. Kids are imaginative. But those explanations wore thin. A mother peeled a peach for her toddler and found the curve of a brow she hadn't seen in years. A courier stopped for a pie and placed a slice on his dashboard. The face looked up as he started the engine. People began to hold their hands over their mouths in grocery stores, not because of the sight, but because the sight made a sound, a low susurration, like breath moving through leaves.
Town gossip moves in circles, but this was different. The faces were recognizable to different people for different reasons. Someone muttered a name, and the fruit answered by dividing to reveal a profile, a scar, a laugh line. A record clerk checked old missing persons files and found names that matched photographs tucked into the backs of county ledgers, cases that stopped because there was nowhere left to search. The orchard, whatever it was, began to point. I pulled the public records myself. Reports that said, last seen near orchard, frayed into shorthand, dates, initials, an officer's tired signature. One file, faded at the corners, said the sisters had left after dusk to collect late pears. That was the last confirmed sighting. After that, the notes read like a conversation with a wall. No leads, no witnesses. Theories came, runaway, accident, misadventure, but nothing accounted for the pattern of fruit showing faces years later. Nothing until someone remembered old harvest nights and their rituals.
There had been a harvest ritual, decades earlier, a way of reading the orchard's yield when a town wanted answers. Harlan, the keeper, used to say small prayers and leave a bowl of cider on the largest stump. Folks gave a piece of their fear to the trees. People in town had stopped doing it, embarrassed, ashamed, or simply modern. But rituals have a way of waiting. When the faces began to appear, a handful of locals started to cut deliberately, to ask aloud what they'd kept to themselves. Names, accusations, apologies. The orchard listened.
Then came the night the ledger was found. Not a paper ledger, an image that only a knife could unlock. Someone took a pear in the dark and split it on a picnic table. Inside was not only a face, but a detail no one had known. A stain on a collar, a smear of soil that matched the pattern at the base of a drainage ditch behind the sisters' old house. It was an image that suggested movement, a direction. It suggested that the orchard remembered not just people, but actions.
That discovery broke something. A woman who kept her mouth shut for years, we'll call her Eliza, went to the sheriff the next morning with trembling hands. She spoke of a truck and a light and a choice she had never voiced. In whispered fragments, she named a man who had been around town in the right years, someone polite in town, but hard in back rooms. She said she had helped move boxes once and seen a pair of gloves fall, the kind you only find in work trucks. She had told herself it was nothing. The orchard had other ideas. When a community keeps silence, it builds a kind of scaffolding around guilt. The orchard cut through that scaffolding with quiet, agricultural insistence, peach by peach, apple by apple. People started to follow the fruit's suggestions, to reopen sheds, to dig in places they had always avoided. Some finds were ordinary, a child's shoe, an old tin lunchbox. Some were more precise, the pattern of tire tracks in clay that matched a vector one resident remembered seeing in a storm. The small puzzle pieces began to fit in ways that paperwork had never allowed. The turning point was not cinematic. There was no single shout or accusation. It was a choice. Someone chose to keep a fruit and cut it in front of a room of people who had denied. The cut revealed a handprint on a wrist, mud embedded in skin that matched the marks on a pair of gloves a local man had once sold at a yard sale. He denied, he railed, but the town had changed. The orchard had given a picture that everyone could look at. Secrets that had relied on distance and doubt found themselves exposed in slices of sweet flesh.
Late that night, a handful of people walked into the orchard under a low, indifferent moon. They carried nothing but knives and flashlights and a kind of determined shame. The trees were black silhouettes. The air smelled of sap and old rain. At first there was silence, then a slow series of cuts, peel, quarter, split, each one answered by a face or a fragment. Faces looked like they had been pressed closed for years, a laugh line, a missing front tooth, the hollow near an ear where an earring had once hung. One by one, people read them aloud, naming what had been unnamed for decades.
The moment the orchard's ledger was read aloud, something in the group shifted. Old alliances cracked. Some left in anger. Others stayed to listen. A woman screamed once. Not a theatrical scream, but the sound of someone who had kept a weight for so long that letting it go was a rupture. Police took statements at dawn. A search turned up objects and fragments consistent with the images. Investigations restarted. Not everything resolved. Not every question got an answer. But the town could no longer pretend its silence was innocence.
After that night, there were consequences that felt small and enormous at once. Families rearranged themselves. Harlan's property was fenced and catalogued. Some people who had once been close drifted away, not out of malice, but because the gravity of what they had avoided changed who they were. Mara and June's mother, older now, folding laundry, kept a bowl of fruit on her kitchen table, and for the first time in years spoke the sisters' names aloud. Saying the names did not fix everything. Saying the names, though, made air move again.
Not everyone accepted what had happened. Skeptics wrote op-eds about suggestion and collective imagination. A few insisted the whole thing was attention-seeking or folklore dressed as evidence. I want to be clear. The orchard is not a courtroom, and a face in fruit is not admissible proof. What we can say, what the town could no longer deny, is that stories have power, and sometimes the land keeps its own way of talking back. In this case, the land's speech opened doors some had locked for decades.
Months later, someone found a single seed tucked inside an apple core and kept it in a matchbox. On the seed, under a microscope, there was a smudge that one woman swore looked like handwriting. She thought she could make out a letter. She couldn't be sure. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Maybe it was nothing at all. But she placed that seed on a windowsill anyway, and every morning she said a name over it, a private thing. Not because she expected the seed to answer, but because she had learned to move toward names instead of away from them.
If you find yourself thinking of the orchard tomorrow, notice what you do with names. Do you tuck them away? Do you say them and let them change the rooms you keep? The orchard did not make truth. It made a kind of insistence. It made a place where memory could be cut open and examined. And for some, that was enough to begin the work of atonement.
If you're still here, it means the story followed you all the way to the end. Take a breath. Look around your room. Make sure everything is exactly where you left it. I'm Samnang. If this episode stayed with you, share it with someone who listens in the dark like you do. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, check the corners. Good night.